text it to you.
Thank you. I now call this regular meeting of the Board of Education to order at 7 p.m. We'll take a moment of silence to be followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I'll have the coordinator call the roll.
Mr. Dixon?
Here.
Mr. Rollins?
Here.
Mr. Scrivano?
Here.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Here.
Mr. Siegel?
Here.
Mr. Connor?
Here.
Mr. Escobedo? With 6 present, 1 absent, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Before we go any further, I'd like to thank again Rod Waddell for helping us out with the media broadcast on Channel 20 for us. Rod, thank you for being here.
Hey, Rod.
Jefferson graduate. We have no recognitions to do tonight, so we'll move right on to our petitions and communications portion of our agenda, where we invite the public to make comments. The First Amendment of the United States Constitution guarantees the rights of citizens to petition their government, as well as provides for freedom of speech. Also, the Illinois School Code requires that there be a time at regular and special meetings for public comment. Thus, we are following those mandates during this petitions and communication portion of our agenda. According to Board Policy 2.230, the public comments portion of the meeting is limited to a total of 30 minutes. The board will not respond to comments at this time. If it is appropriate, you'll be contacted in a timely manner by staff in response to your questions. In order to allow sufficient time for the business of the board and to conduct our meetings in an efficient and effective manner, we are requesting that you comply with the guidelines that are posted, and each speaker will be allowed no more than 2 minutes to address the board. It is not appropriate to address individual board members or individual administrators or discuss matters that would otherwise be confidential in such open meetings. I will call 2 names. The first is the person whose turn it is to speak, and the second, if you would come towards the front and sit in a vacant chair so you'll be ready. We have a clock on the wall to help you with your 2 minutes, and we thank you for your interest and your cooperation with our guidelines. Our first speaker tonight is Richard Meeks, to be followed by Reverend Anthony Greer. Richard, if you'll hit that button to turn that mic on. There you go.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Good evening, board, and thank you for allowing me to speak at this time. I'm here to speak for naming the one of the schools after Constance Lane. I've spoken before, and I speak about what I call the trifecta. When I was a little kid, I went to a school called P.A. Peterson. Every teacher in the school was white, principal, there were maybe 7 black kids in the whole school. When we moved to the west side and came here, my 5th grade teacher, Marge Price, African-American woman, best teacher in the world. But even better than that, when I got to 6th grade, I had my first male teacher, who was also African-American. That was Sterling Holly. And then we had a principal, and her name was Connie Lane. And this woman, I tell you, made us feel like we were somebody. We would go to school, even when she would get on our case for being inappropriate, she still gave us something. And I'll never forget that. And I want the city to know that not just me, but a number of other African-American kids and even white kids who had her as a principal and as a teacher can tell you that this woman has given a lot. I truly think this school, one of the schools, should be named after her. Now, I know Dr. King is one of the names. I know that, and I'm grateful for that. That makes me feel good. But I think if it was somebody like Connie Lane, kids who went to school here would feel a part of that and know that she shines light on them and anybody else that would go to that school. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. Anthony Greer.
Good evening.
Reverend Greer.
Good evening. I'm
Lost your
here
card.
as a concerned pastor and citizen of this community in lieu of the behavior and actions that took place at Auburn High School on December 7th with one of the PE/football coaches and one of our honor roll students, an African-American male, who was presumably choked by the PE teacher. The parents are in concern and in somewhat of disarray because the district has not made any sense of urgency to contact this parent back to let them feel some type of comfort. Also, we know that the staff is on leave. We understand that. We do know that in most cases when Caucasian staff is on leave, they normally return back with some type of stipulations. When an African-American staff does such behavior, they're fired in 48 hours. This parent is concerned because her son is not feeling safe. She's made calls, has not gotten any return calls, and my concern is that we as a district, we as a community, any child should not even feel threatened, or at any time they experience something like this district, that behavior becomes first priority to the parent, because this child now, those things could take place and could affect that student's education, could affect that student's way of thinking, and not only that, that student could walk in fear if this teacher is allowed back in that building. So we expect you all to contact this parent so then that we can get some understanding, and that we also ask that this staff be terminated. I am aware that you will not address this tonight. I don't expect you to, and I hope that you don't do it in a sly and cunning way to respond and say we're not going to talk about it or say slick words like you have in the past, but we do expect you to return a call to this parent immediately. Thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you, sir. Carol Jamber Smith, to be followed by Reverend Derek Shelby.
Thank you for allowing me to speak to you tonight. In the past, I have been an elected public official in the city, and I know that these kinds of positions come with terrific responsibility, and I am in support of your work on behalf of the community of Rockford. I'm here tonight to speak in favor of naming school number 1 in honor of Connie Lane. Connie was a dear friend, she was a mentor, but most importantly, she epitomizes all that the Rockford Public Schools hope for. First black teacher, first black principal, retired as the assistant superintendent of schools, and constantly called out of retirement to hold various positions in the public schools. Connie was a product of the public schools. You are building a new school in a neighborhood that is so excited about this revitalization. And we had the opportunity to hear from a couple that had attended, whose family had attended for 4 generations Kishwaukee School, who thought that Kishwaukee School should remain named as Kishwaukee School. But when they heard us speak in favor of Connie, they said this school, which is revitalizing a neighborhood, bringing new energy to a neighborhood, should bring energy in its naming to someone who was the result of the best values of the public school. So I ask you to consider naming school number 2 in honor of Connie Lane. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Reverend Derek Shelby, to be followed by Denise Pearson.
1 Timothy chapter 6. Verse 7. For we brought nothing into this world, and it is for certain we can carry nothing out. We brought nothing into this world, 1 Timothy chapter 6. Verse 7, it is for certain we shall take nothing out. Rockford, the school district, has a wicked history of racism. That ain't even the right word, of evil. Now, I just sitting here listening to the lady with her baby. But the stats came out for 2017. Thank the Lord for Miss Karina over there. Listen to this. Of the 2,885 students who received out-of-school suspensions in 2017, 1,727 were black. 6 years in a row, running 60%. Black kids, especially males, they targeting them. Now, we got somebody making a lot of money off these new schools and all that. Listen, You don't take it with you. You came into this world with nothing, and you're going to leave with nothing. You're going to meet the Lord Jesus, and he's going to ask you about your filthy life. He's going to ask you why you was kicking all those black kids out of school. And the Lord loves white people. He loves black people. He loves Hispanics. He loves every human being on this planet. He shed his blood for all of us. But there are some people going to hell because he can't save them. You came in this world with nothing, and the whole district is after black males. It's a disgrace before the Lord, before this nation, and before the United States Constitution. You came in, you're going to leave with nothing. All that money you stealing, you ain't going to take a dime with you. Thank the Lord Jesus for his blood.
Thank you, sir. Denise Pearson is our last speaker.
Good evening, and thank you for allowing me to speak. I am speaking in support of naming the school after Mrs. Constance Lane. It is evident that we should probably spend a little more time on Black history than 1 month. But after learning more and continuing to learn more about her, I am definitely in support of naming the school after her. In regards to the incident that occurred at Auburn High School, it saddens me that to see the response at the school board meeting when it is a problem. And I can't stress enough how important it is that we remain or develop a proactive act and getting ahead of some of the things that occurs. And I ask the community that we deal with this with dignity and respect, and that the school district would indeed respond to the call. And if you need help in problem solving, I am volunteering my service, because it is important that we stay consistent with the consequences given for such behavior. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Denise. I would ask at this time, are there any board member comments? Mr. Siegel.
We had the naming committee put together by the superintendent and the administration, and I was put on it, which as board members, I think we all really relish the opportunity to serve on committees, so this was a really great opportunity. Not really. But this ended up being a really amazing opportunity for me. I got to meet a lot of great people from the community, from within the schools that are being affected by the 2 new schools being built, and was really impressed with the positive perspectives everybody brought as to why they wish their schools, recommendations to come forth. I am the one that ended up circulating the petition to have the school on Kishwaukee Street named after Martin Luther King Jr., and it seemed like a really amazing idea at the time. I've always had a particular affinity for Dr. King. We actually had a resolution that there would always be a school in the district named after Martin Luther King Jr., and I wanted to support that resolution by having a school named after King with students in it. And how much greater would it be if we had a 21st century school named for Dr. King? But kind of like the family that was here for one of the meetings and listened to 6 very eloquent speakers speak convincingly in support of naming the Kishwaukee Street School for Constance Lane, I felt my loyalties to the King petition wavering. So I talked with a lot of people since that night, and everybody I talked to only spoke of Ms. Lane in the most glowing terms. Spoke with one teacher, I just texted her and asked her what she could tell me about Constance Lane, and she replied with one word: regal. Everything that I heard about this amazing woman says that she really deserves to have her name attached to the school. I'm not in a position, I'm not even sure I could remove the King petition. But if I had seen a Lane petition circulated, I think I would have been convinced to have put my name on it. I am actually putting forth my support to have the Kishwaukee Street School named for Constance Lane. I understand that there will be people who would like to see a building named after King, and I'm confident that we will be able to honor and satisfy that as well. But this time that I spent with the naming committee, which I really didn't look forward to at the beginning, turned out to be a really very amazing experience, largely for my exposure to the person of Connie Lane. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Siegel. Any other board member comments at this time? I've been asked, at times we've had some audio difficulties on Channel 20, the Comcast broadcast of our board meetings, and I just would want to remind our audience that, or anyone, for future use, you can stream that on any computer by just going to www.rps205.com and clicking on the News and Events tab at the top, and then click on Channel 20 Live Stream, and you'll get a live stream of our meetings, this meeting and any future board meetings or committee meetings as well. So seeing no other board member comments, we'll move on then to the consent portion of our agenda, including the following items: the meeting minutes of November 14th and November 28th, payroll, accounts payable, purchase orders, contracts under 10,000, construction bid request logs, and travel, the bid recommendation for modular classrooms at Haskell Elementary School, the recurring contracts for the TSA Consulting Group Administrative Services Agreement renewal, the recurring lease agreement for iPads, the recurring addendum with the Rockford Park District for grants for summer programs, Carnell Conabear, the asbestos abatement inspection, design and oversight services, the other consent items including the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding for Secondary Reading Support Coach Differential, the appointment of IMRF Authorized Agent, the Workers' Compensation Settlement Agreement, and the Freedom of Information Log. Is there a motion and a second to approve these consent items?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor.
Second.
Second by Mr. Siegel. Are there any consent items that board members wish to have pulled for separate consideration? Seeing none, the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of the consent items.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins? Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
The motion passes with 6 yeses, 1 absent.
We are now at the closed session consent agenda items, including the appointment of Dane Youngblood as the 12-month Director of Purchasing, the HR organizational report and addendum, and the closed session consent agenda items, including the student disciplines. Unless otherwise modified below, the board adopts and accepts the hearing officer's findings and recommendations in the following cases in which students expelled or suspended are prohibited from being on school grounds and school-sponsored activities without the prior written permission of the principal. Students 4127 and 4129 are expelled for the remainder of this school year through the first semester of next school year. Student 4130 is expelled for the remainder of this school year. The expulsions for students 4128 and 4131 are held in abeyance contingent upon an expulsion in abeyance agreement for the remainder of this school year through the first semester of next school year. And the student 4132 is expelled for the remainder of this school year and the entire 2018-19 school year. The following consent items, closed session consent items for student EIAs for 3392, 3393, 3394, 3395, and student 3396. Is there a motion and a second to approve these closed session consent items?
So moved.
Moved by Mr.
Second.
Connor. Second by Mr. Dixon or Mr. Siegel. Any items that board members wish to have pulled for a separate consideration? Mr. Rollins?
All of 11?
All of 11, okay. Any others? If not, I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the items not pulled from closed session.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
The motion passes with 6 yeses, 1 absent.
I'll now take a motion and a second for the pulled item, which is the student disciplines under item number 11.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor,
Second.
second by Mr. Siegel. Any discussion? Not. Have the coordinator call the roll then on the approval of closed session student discipline items number 11.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch? Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Abstain.
The motion passes with 5 yeses, 1 abstain, 1 absent.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda is the superintendent's report. Dr. Jarrett.
I'd like to cede my time to the new Executive Director of Alignment Rockford, Sandisha Burnett, and she's going to be presenting our quarterly report. So we'll turn the floor to her.
Oh, is it? Okay. Good evening. Thank you for being here. All right.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Never have that problem at home. so.
Okay.
Once again, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you once again for giving me this opportunity to present an update on what's happening with Alignment Rockford. First off, just want to give you guys an update on what happened and occurred with the 2017 Academy Expo. This event is now in its 6th year. Woohoo. And it keeps on getting better with time. We've moved to a new facility this year, so thanks to the partnership that the district has with the Park District, we were able to use the indoor sports center located on Riverside, and it was a huge hit with those in attendance. We engaged 100 businesses and had over 400 community volunteers and over 1,700 students. And with all of that, the manpower that it took to put on an activity of this magnitude, it converted into dollars, was over $54,000. So it was quite amazing. Some other trending data for the Academy Expo. We took a look back just to see how we've been improving over time. Like I said before, we've been kind of doing this event for the past 6 years. We kind of only went back to 2014, and that was just because that's the date that we really started to actually track metrics. But based upon that, just wanted to note that 2014, 2015, and 2016, you kind of see high student counts in this information here. And actually, it was a result of the fact that 2014, we included Belvedere students, and in 2015, we included Belvedere, Harlem, and Hononegah. 2016, we went back to just an RPS-focused expo event, and 2017 are definitely better metrics and actuals, and that's based upon a more robust process within RPS 205, allowing us to track our students a lot better. So I would also like to highlight the intent to return metrics for the industry experts, as well as, for the industry experts, as well as the hospitality ambassadors. If you notice, those two metrics are well over 90%, which is really good. So it's really great. In our survey response, we always ask our participants, hey, are you willing to come back next year? And to have a response of over 90% is actually quite well. And we consider that a huge success. And it aligns to the feedback that we received from our hospitality ambassadors, as well as industry experts and the students. Some of the key words are excellent opportunity from the hospitality ambassadors, as well as from the industry experts. You know, this was a great overall experience. One person actually quoted that they have been doing career fairs for the past 10 years, and this is the best one that they've ever attended, and they were a part of. The students were very engaging, which is what we want, so those are actually great results. A couple of students had some comments of they actually learned some things from the event, which is always great. They learned the basics of dressing up for a job interview and basically how to behave. And then another student, which is the golden one that we definitely want to keep our focus on, is the purpose of the event, is that students come out of the event kind of have a better idea of what they want to do. So we had a student that actually quoted that, so that was great. Another item new item here is that we've had a bit of a team restructure with an alignment. Currently, or at that time, before we had 5 working teams, and we decided to restructure just to reduce overlap and to re-energize our volunteers. So we have our, you could probably see it better on your slides there, but the Academy Expo team, Career Awareness, and College Readiness teams, they were combined to focus on comprehensive college and career readiness initiatives that align to the profile of a graduate. This new structure would allow volunteer resources to be better utilized at pivotal points. One example is the Academy Expo. It does not take 12 months for it to put on an Academy Expo. So how are we going to utilize and re-engage those volunteers' efforts? We can add them to activities such as career awareness and college readiness. So that was the focus. The Healthy Starts and Pathways team will remain the same. Just to provide you a team update on Healthy Starts. I won't go into the details. I believe there was a handout that was provided to you with details of the tactical plans. You can review it as your leisure. But I just want to highlight some of the timelines and the visions for these activities. Starting with the Healthy Starts Playgroup. You probably know this background, just want to reemphasize it, that the research shows that it's critical that parents and caregivers talk and sing and read aloud to their children every day starting from birth to develop language skills. And we know that well-developed language skills, that provides a strong foundation for reading success. So based on this research, the Healthy Starts team recognized that increased parent-child engagement can significantly close those achievement gaps for children as it pertains to kindergarten readiness and then it results third grade reading levels. So the focus of the parent-child play group will be to increase and develop high-quality interactions between parent and caregivers and their children through active play, and the key word is active. We will be seeking early childhood providers to develop these activities. So additional benefits also will include awareness of community services that support these families and a decrease in isolation of families with young children. The play group will occur at the Grove, and it will target children ages birth to 5, and it will be piloted. We will initiate a pilot in March, starting in March and in May of next year, and then another one in fall. So it will be a 2-phase program. Connected Families, Healthy Starts. This team has completed their environmental scan and are in the process of developing their tactical plan. What they have found in their research is that parents of all backgrounds find our social systems hard to navigate to inquire for services. So this will be another 2-phase process. The first one being the single point of entry, a referral card. And on this card, we'll have key contact information for families with children under 6. And this hopefully will greatly reduce the amount of confusion that causes parents when they try to apply for some of these. Phase 2 will just be a continuation of Phase 1. Once single point of entry contacts have truly been identified from Phase 1, we'll continue with a more robust online process. But both of these activities will move towards a more family-focused and user experience process, more so than just a policy and procedure focused. And the plan will be voted on early next year. Industry councils, this is something new in the pipeline, and the goal of these councils, actually, it's a coordinated effort to develop and implement a workforce talent pipeline to grow local capacity of the Rockford Police Department and the Rockford Fire Department. And this will be a strategic partnership with the district, as well as the team members listed on the slide. Some of the activities underneath the umbrella include building work-based learning and career awareness, identifying gaps between workforce needs and workforce competencies, as well as ensuring connectivity between the curriculum and the needs of the police and fire department, and hopefully resulting in some type of form of college credits. And this is the last slide, but I will have Bridget French. I'm back at UTAS, sorry, I apologize. Bridget French to come and talk to about Great Lakes.
Hello, good evening. So as you recall, Alignment Rockford and Rockford Public Schools received a grant from the Joyce Foundation to fund a cohort called the Great Lakes College and Career Pathways Partnership. That was for 2016 and 17, covering teaching and learning, work-based learning, and connected pathways. We found out last week when we were in Madison that the grant has been extended for 2 more years, which is really exciting for multiple reasons. Our technical support will continue to support the work that we're doing around connected pathways, and this really ties everything that we're working on together. That is the profile of the graduate, that is connecting our pathways on-ramp to ensuring that our academies are being done with fidelity, to our partnership with Rock Valley and Rockford University to ensure that our pathways are really mapped out all the way from K through 16. It also includes transitional coursework and includes the work-based learning opportunities in connection with Alignment Rockford. So it's really a great opportunity for all of us to connect the work that we're doing around our pathways.
So that's the end of the presentation. Are there any questions?
I have a request, Denisha.
Yes.
You've been in your position 3 months now, something like that, roughly?
2.5 months.
2.5 months?
Yes.
Dr. Jarrett and I have heard your career path story, and I'm wondering if you would share that for the benefit of the other board members and the folks in the back, the young folks in the back, about your career path from Rockford Public Schools to where you are today.
Sure.
The 2-minute version, maybe. Or
okay,
whatever.
thank you.
Okay. Because it's a wonderful story.
I will say my story is an alignment story. If alignment was present in, I don't know if I want to say the years that I was in high school, in the year of 1995 or so, somewhere around there, in the early 90s, how about that? If I really feel that if it had not been a partnership that was created between RAM, Rockford Area Minority Management, as well as Sunstrand, I probably wouldn't be here where I am today. At that time, I applied for a scholarship through RAM my senior year in high school, and Sunstrand had a partnership with them as an internship for basically just a summer internship. And that gave me the exposure right out of high school, the ability to sit side by side by manufacturing engineers and truly understand what they did. That being an engineer wasn't just about how well you did in math. It wasn't about wearing just the typical pocket protector and glasses, even though if you have that, it's okay. But it was about if you have a mindset of goal of wanting to learn, or if you have a passion for problem solving, you too can be an engineer. If you have a passion for project management, getting things in order, you too can be an engineer. And so that exposure helped me to realize that engineers are normal and regular people just like we are, and it doesn't take as much as what you think it takes is not really what it takes. So from there, I never left Sunstrand until this job, which was 22 years ago. And so I will say that I have grown up in that company and that it has treated myself and my family very well. I met my husband there, have 2 beautiful boys, and they really, really, really blessed me. Growing opportunities in engineering, management, as well as my last year was in human resources working in talent development. And so when I got the call for this opportunity, I kind of was skeptical because I'm not from the field of education. But when I heard more about the Alignment Rockford goals and their mission and vision, it resonated within my spirit because that's what happened to me. And so I want to help be a part of an organization that is creating those same experiences for our children. So that's my story.
It's a great story. All right. So,
no more questions, right?
Any other questions? All right. Thank you for being here. Okay. I have lost my script. There it is. Okay. All right. We will now move on to committee reports then. Mrs. McCulloch, the Education Committee report.
Education Committee has not met since our last board meeting. We were scheduled to meet in this room next Tuesday, but the room is slated for some construction.
Oh, okay.
So we lost our parking space and our video feed. Hence, because we think most of our people listen remotely, we're going to combine our December and January meetings and just hold a single one in January, and that'll be January 16th, and in this room.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Rollins, the Finance Committee report?
The Finance Committee met in this room on Monday, December 4th. We talked briefly about our budget development and planning calendar. We're a little bit behind the curve, and we talked about the fact that we may have some extra meetings along the way to make up for lost time. We had a presentation on the draft 2017 audit. That is on our agenda for later on tonight, so I will leave it to Ms. Yar and Sikich to give that presentation. And then we heard from, then we also had a discussion about the 2017 levy. And once again, that is going to be on the agenda for later on this evening. I will say on the levy, we did take a vote as a committee to recommend to the board that the board hold the levy amount the same as it was last year. So that was a recommendation from the committee. And then lastly, we heard from the district's relatively new internal auditor. He went through some of his work, went through specifically a few of the reports that he's created and some of the actual work that he's done as examples of some of the work that he's done. And our next meeting, I was just trying to look it up not quickly enough, will be, I don't believe it's the first Monday of January, because I think that is too close to the first of... It is the first.
It is the first.
All right, so what date is that? Somebody throw it out to me.
The second.
January, Monday...
8th.
All right, no, we did move it. So it's on January 8th, 2018, in this room.
At 5:30. Yeah. Mr. Connor, the Operations Committee report.
Operations Committee met in this room at 6:30 on Tuesday, December 5th. We had a lot of things to go through. Medical stop loss provider was presented, and that was recommended, and that is on the agenda tonight, so I won't go through that again. TransFinder, which just in a nutshell is for transportation, mapping, and route management. Again, same thing that was presented and was recommended. There was an early childhood update, which was really sort of directional, talking about funding, and just very quickly, there was discussed state preschool for all, state preschool expansion, federal Head Start, and Circles of Learning as part of the funding opportunities. And the real purpose of it was to talk about projected programming. And one of the things that I think is notable is that for 3- and 4-year-olds, one of the targets is to have 20 full-day classrooms, which matches some of the things that was said in the Alignment Rockford update, and obviously is focusing on early childhood and better preparations of students. So that was positive. There was a lot of good information on that. The Canover, the asbestos abatement, that obviously has already been done, but that was discussed. Asbestos is always tricky. There was an update, so all those were recommendations. They've all come to the board. There was report and updates, and probably the most notable there was the Building Naming Committee update. Essentially, there was planning for the naming committee, and basically it included representation from all the elementary schools that are being replaced, and that included all the principals, and including some PTO representation, a couple board member representation, administration representation, and community representation. So it was a large group. And there was 2 nights of public input on the recommendations from the public. There was also petitions that were given for the 5 names that were considered. After a lot of discussion, The recommendation by the committee was to name school number 1 out in Cherry Valley as Cherry Valley Elementary School, and to honor Sergeant Leonard B. Keller in a future point with one of the sites at the location, such as the library or the gym and so forth. So that was a very strong recommendation. The second recommendation was to name school number 2, which is physically at Kishwaukee, to be named in honor of Constance Lane. And it was also a recommendation to honor Dr. King. There's a current building named for Dr. King, but there was a desire to see what other options were available. The committee actually recommended to make that recommendation, and that went through the operations committee and came forth. What is being recommended tonight is basically to only act, the administration, the superintendent recommended that we only act on the recommendation for school number 1, and that there be a period of several months to do more public open discussion on school number 2. So that's the way it is on the agenda, but I just want to make it clear to everybody that the actual naming committee did make recommendations for both schools. In addition, there was a lead testing update. The good news is that our goal is to not have any lead, and that the results were actually pretty good. They're published, and they're quite lengthy because it's for each facility. The one item I did bring up with everybody as a reminder was most all of the lead testing, one of the major factors was it was located or localized in fixtures, not in the pipes themselves. So that was something the administration with the city and the county have verified. So that's good news. It means that we can essentially deal with the fixtures by and large. There was a recommendation on the sinks in the various classrooms as really they were recommending not being used. So again, it's out there, but I thought it was very good. There was also a recommendation. We've been approached by, I believe, the Rockford Police Department primarily to test a system called a gunshot location system. So that was discussed, and I think there's some details to be worked out, but that is in motion with the with the city. And again, there was a lot of discussion, and so there'll be follow-up on that. There was a facilities master plan update. That actually went quite well. Where we stand right now, again, is we're really in good shape. We have paid about 77% of the total of the $250 million. And in terms of committed, which means it's in motion, there's another 15%. So we're really in the 90 percentile in terms of either done or committed. So I think that that's really good news, and that goes apace. There was an update on the replatting of 4 acres out at Jefferson for a land sale update. And at the time, Mr. Schmidt said that that would be coming more than likely in probably February, because there's a replatting that has to go through a process with the city of Rockford. And the last, and of course, never the least, there was a custodial update. And what I will say is that, there are still a lot of challenges. The survey results that were given show what I'll call a mildly positive direction, which means that when you look at the question, particularly how was it compared to last month, it was kind of even and up overall. However, I think my comment would be the actual rating, if you look at the numbers, it was on a 4-point scale, as you all know, not my favorite scale. I like 5, but there we go. And roughly, I think the average was somewhere in the 2 1/4 range, which means it's still, from my point of view, on the low end of acceptable, hardly, and that there's a lot of open issues. The good news is staffing is finally with very close in terms of the FTEs, but equipment is still an issue, and materials. And one of the things, there was representation of the building folks from the union there, and it's clear that there is some engagement there, but there's a lot of issues, and that teachers and staff have made it known that there's a number of outstanding issues. So I think the one net I have out of this is we still have some issues. We've asked that this come back at every month. Kudos to the administration, they're getting stats, and they are reaching out to everybody. So I think that part's positive, but we still have a lot of work yet to go. And I'm sorry for the length of that, but we had a lot going. So our next meeting will not be in January because we're on scheduled for the first Tuesday in January, which obviously is too close to New Year. And it was decided all the way around that we would not meet until February. So we basically have a combination January-February meeting in this room on February the 6th at 6:30. Woo.
Micah, Ms. McCullough.
I do have a question for Mr. Connor. The conversation about the early childhood, you mentioned that one of the things that I think your committee took some recommendation on was with regard to the facility where they'd like to place the students, and it is one of the buildings that we are currently slating to close. And
yes, thank you.
As I was listening, I was wondering, what kind of costs were involved? What work needs to be done in that building to keep it open? What is the cost of using the facility? I mean, is the grant money go to it? There were so many questions, and it got moved on without any of those being answered. And I'm just wondering if you've asked for follow-up information, because we will look at Education Committee, at the educational component of that grant. But we are trying to reduce our footprint, and here we are looking to keep buildings open. So
No, these are good questions. Number one, there was not, I think, and you're right, I should have said that it is, they're looking to keep Dennis open. I think and I'm interpreting for this, and I'll let the administration speak to it, but from my point of view, yes, I think there are some questions on costs, but I think also, if you look at the overall, obviously Dennis already has has accommodated the target group, little kids, because fixtures, everything is different. And so there will be some costs, but I think one of the trends that we see, which is a good one, if you look at the fall housing report, virtually every grade was up, but I believe kindergarten was down maybe 100 or something like that. But net is that overall, we're seeing good increases. So I think there is some reconsideration of which buildings should be kept open, because we had a schedule for closure, and I think at this point, it seemed like, and again, this is my view, and I'll let, again, the administration speak to it, that Dennis seemed to be one of the most optimal options, and I'll cede to Dr. Jarrett if you want to maybe say a few more words on that part.
I think we were just looking to report that as part of the grant writing process that Dennis would be under consideration as part of long-term planning. We have a lot of work to do before I feel like this is fully vetted enough where we would make a recommendation to the board. That vetting will continue at the Education Committee meeting. Before it makes it to the board level, we will ensure that we will do a thorough review of what our previous investment has been with our partnership with Head Start, which is what this is really contingent upon. We will also spend a lot of time being very specific about what any future operational or instructional costs would be, what the impact would be on Fund 10, grant funds. So we are not in a place at this point from an administrative perspective where we are formally recommending this. We are in the process of using the Operations Committee to gain some initial feedback, and the Education Committee as Ms. Nelson begins the process of writing the grant. There will also be another fail-safe in place that we would obviously have to accept what is written into the grant as well. So we're just trying to scramble to get as much feedback as we can. We appreciated Operations Committee's perspective. We'll look forward to hearing from Ed Committee in January, and Ms. Nelson will be continuing to do the kind of research that's necessary to make sure the board has a very clear picture before it takes action.
Ms. McCullough?
Well, I just follow up that I'm a little concerned that there's not enough information. And so for it to be moved forward, it's a great idea. And ideas without price tags, when we have limited budgets, are worrisome to me, especially with the focus. And I don't know how much my understanding is demographically, we're not seeing, huge spikes. What we're trying to do is capture students at an earlier age.
Correct.
I'm also concerned because as we put forward our maintenance schedules that Mr. Schmidt and his department has been putting forward for the roofing and all the different parts, the schools that we're closing, we're not even considering that information on those. So I think there's a lot that we need to glean before we commit. And so I look forward to administration making sure that we have the full package. And I think even bringing it forward to Operations Committee without any, as just an idea, without any money is.
Well, and just to speak to that, Mrs. McCulloch, the reason we brought it to Operations Committee without details is we wanted to get a sense of, is the general trade-off of looking at any kind of additional operational risk and cost worth considering if it meant adding 280 additional all-day seats. And the general feeling we got is continue down your journey and do additional research and fully formulate that. If we would have received really negative feedback from the Operations Committee and they would have said, gosh, we think it's a terrible idea to even explore this any further because of operational risk, that would have at least at a minimum given us some pause. But that was really what we were framing is the overall value proposition is we have very significant challenges with kindergarten readiness in our district. This potential co-writing process would allow us to add an additional 280 seats, which would cause a need for additional classrooms. And we were not looking at this point for a full recommendation. We were looking for, are we on the right track? Is this something we should continue to pursue? So I just want to be clear that, again, we were using it really as an advisory as opposed to looking for a formal proposal. So that was why that we used the committee in the way we did. And again, you will fully have a picture of what the financial cost will be before we ask the board to take any action.
Mr. Rollins?
I just want to add that I do share Mrs. McCulloch's concerns and just want to remind everybody that we're funded for K through 12 education. And so if we talk about expanding, if we talk about doing early childhood, unless there's state dollars attached to that, that money only comes from one of two places. We either take it away from K through 12 education or we tax people more. And so we need to have those discussions. We need to have a complete understanding of what costs would be attached to something like this. We did supposedly, one of the reasons for the facilities plan was to shrink our footprint to address the fact that we actually have a shrinking population in Rockford. Rockford lost more population than any other city in Illinois since the last census. So while adding services is great, if we have to pay it on a shrinking tax base, that's really a concern. So I will be looking forward to a complete financial analysis, I guess, of what this is going to cost and where that money is going to come from. The other thing that I'm just going to throw out there, this is a little bit of old history, which some on the board might not know because you weren't there. One of the first things that happened when I was first elected to the board in 2011 is the administration told us that they were going to get a grant for expanded early childhood, and they needed us to vote to expand early childhood so they could get the grant, and we did that. And we actually found out after the fact, this was not volunteered to us, the board had to ask a lot of questions, that they never got the grant. They never got the expanded grant. So we've already expanded early childhood using local resources. Took us a lot of questioning to find out how much that was costing. At one point it was $1.7 million a year. I think we eventually have gotten that down to $1 million a year. And so one question that I will be asking at some point if this comes forward is, if there's an opportunity to do more grant writing with the state, is there any way, rather than adding additional classrooms, that we can use it to get us back to where we thought we were going to be in 2011 when we were told that we would be getting an expanded grant that never materialized? Is there any way for us to do that? Because That way, we would save local dollars, we would get more state dollars in here to actually pay for the early childhood, which is what the state is supposed to be doing.
Any other comments or questions for Mr. Connor?
I think the one thing that I want to put in context here, because I appreciate the concerns and the comments, is that one of the factors we do have to talk about is if we have, even though we're losing folks over on the Rockford area, we are not losing out of the Rockford Public Schools. And I think the second thing is, from a preparation standpoint, and this is not to beg the question on money, because that's terribly important, but we know there's a lot of kids coming to school who are not prepared. And I think, this is one, if we have to have some tough financial discussions, I think we would all welcome it. But from the goal setting, and that's the way I treated the session, is the direction of both where we are in terms of student population and where our greatest needs are. And that's where I think the context was. But that does not get away from the legitimate concerns, but I do want to make sure that those two goals are on the table.
Thank you. We'll move on then to our action item. Our first action item tonight is the resolution to approve the 2017 tax levy. This information was presented to the Finance Committee and to the Board. Is there a motion and a second to approve the resolution for the 2017 tax levy?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Rollins, second by Mr. Connor. Is there any questions or discussion? Mr. Rollins.
So I did mention this before, I just want to mention it again. It was the recommendation of the committee, and I believe it's the recommendation of the administration to hold the levy. And when we talk about a levy, the levy is the actual number that we seek to collect from the local taxpayers. I mean, people talk about the rate, the levy. The rate we don't determine, we only determine the levy. The levy is the amount of money that we are collecting from local taxpayers. I do want to point out, and I'm proud of this fact, that we have kept that levy flat. It's fluctuated a little bit year over year, usually because of issues with the debt service levy. But from an operations standpoint, we've kept that levy flat since 2012, from 2011 to 2012. We actually went down significantly between 2011 and 2012. We voluntarily gave up the, and I can't remember the exact number, it was like 56 cents kids win tax. 58 cents.
That's
Mr. Scrivano remembers better than I do.
Okay.
Our levy went down significantly. And if you want to actually just see the numbers, it's in the audit report. Towards the back of the audit report, there are a series of pages that just have interesting financial data about the district, and it's on page 133. Shows the actual extended levy for the levy year. And if you go back to 2011, levy year 2011, we levied $169.8 million. And our levy last year, which is what we're seeking to keep it at for the next year, is $155.6 million. That's how much we've actually taken the levy down. And there are several taxing bodies locally that can brag about keeping their levies flat. I think we're the only ones who have actually reduced our levy within recent memory. So I think that's something we can be proud of.
Thank you. Any other comments on the levy? Now I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of action item 15, the resolution to approve the 2017 tax levy.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
The motion passes with 6 yeses, 1 absent.
Thank you. We are now on to new business, and administration is requesting the board suspend the rules to approve item 16A due to the audit work not being completed in time to accommodate the 2 readings rule. So we'll need a motion to suspend the rules first.
So moved. Second.
Mr. Siegel, second by Mr. Connor. Any discussion on that? Now I'll have the coordinator call the roll on the approval to suspend the rules.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
The motion passes with 6 yeses, 1 absent.
Motion for this first and then the presentation. Now, I need a motion to approve the fiscal year audited report that was presented in our packet.
So moved.
So move.
Moved by Mr.
Second.
Rollins and seconded by somebody.
Oh.
Okay. Mr. Dixon, okay. All right, so we will now have the presentation. We need okay, and a third. We had a third on that, okay? Okay, so we're going to have the presentation now, and then we'll vote, right? Okay. Ms. Yar.
Stickage performed our audit this year for FY17. They also performed it last year. So I will turn this presentation over to Chad Lucas, who's a partner at Stickage.
Okay.
Thank you very much. We appreciate the opportunity to work with the district again this year. I'd like to thank Michelle and the rest of the staff for all their help during the audit process. We ask a lot of questions while they're trying to do their daily work, so we really appreciate their help. There are a couple of documents that I'll go through at a high level, summarized information for the fiscal year ending June 30, 2017. The first item is the comprehensive annual financial report, which is the actual audit report itself, and then there's also a board communications packet with some required communications that we have. Included in your comprehensive annual financial report is some information that is above and beyond the basic requirements of financial reporting. And this is because you submit your CAFR, your comprehensive annual financial report, to the Association of School Business Officials for their certificate program for excellence in financial reporting. So the first section is the introductory section, and this includes some officer information, organizational charts, and then the actual certificate from the prior year. Included in there also is a transmittal letter with some background information on the district. This is prepared by management. The main section of the financial report with the basic financial statements is the financial section, and included in this section is our independent auditor's report. It's what we refer to as an unmodified opinion, which is a clean opinion, which means that we believe everything included in the financial statements are fairly presented based on our audit procedures. After that is the management's discussion and analysis, and this information is prepared by management, and it provides some summary information, some overviews, condensed financial information, and comparisons between last year and this year, and some discussion about why things may have increased or decreased or deteriorated or improved or things like that. So there's some discussion. This is really where I point most readers for a 50-page document or whatever to go to get the most bang for your buck in terms of reading the financial statements. After that are the basic financial statements. Included in your basic financial statements are what we refer to as government-wide statements, and these are a consolidated view of the district. These statements are on a full accrual basis, and they include capital assets and long-term liabilities. So there's a long-term measurement focus for these financial statements. It's similar to a for-profit entity on a full accrual basis. Just a couple of highlights from those government-wide statements. The statement of net position is essentially like your balance sheet. It has all of your assets less your liabilities, which include those capital assets and debt. And the net amount is your net position. And so you can see there that there was approximately $174 million of total net position at the end of the fiscal year. And that's made up of a couple of different categories of net position. The first one being the NICA there is the net investment in capital assets, and that's essentially your capital assets less any debt that's related to those capital assets. So that makes up a significant over half of the total net position of approximately $91 million. Then there are some restrictions because of tax levies, so there's about $46 million of restricted net position, and then the remaining amount is the unrestricted portion of about $37 million. The other statement included in the government-wide statements is a statement of activities. This is your income statement on the financial position as a whole of the district. For the year ended June 30th, 2017, the net position improved, and there was an increase of approximately $2 million. The other statements that are included in the basic financial statements are the fund financial statements, and this what may be what you normally would see in terms of fund reporting. It's on a current resources measurement focus, modified accrual. It does not include those capital assets or debt. Again, the same financial statements are included here, the balance sheet, and these statements are on a fund focus, major fund focus. So there's a couple of different major funds listed, and then there's a aggregate non-major column that's included in these financial statements. The fund balance, again, assets less liability at the fund financial statement level. There's approximately $195 million in total. About 1.4 million of that is non-spendable. This includes things like prepaid items, insurance, things of that nature. There's a restricted portion of about 106 million, and then there's unrestricted portion, of which some of is considered assigned. Most of that is the working cash that's unrestricted, but it's assigned for a specific purpose. Then you have the statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance. These are your income statement items. And again, I mentioned before that the focus is on major funds here. So there were three major funds: the general fund, capital projects fund, and bond and interest fund. The remaining funds are all included at the non-major aggregate column. Overall, there was a decrease of approximately 24 million. You can see there the differences in the various funds of the increases or decreases. Most of that 24 million relates to a decrease in the capital projects fund, which really is a spend down of your bond proceeds from the previous year. You've also have an internal service fund for your self-insured health insurance. This just includes information about your claims, your claims payable, things of that nature. The costs are all allocated to the other individual funds. There are also a statement on fiduciary funds, which are your student activity funds. Those are funds that you hold on behalf of other organizations, your student organizations. After that is your notes of the financial statements, and this includes all your district accounting policies. There's more detailed information on all those different types of things: deposits, capital assets, debt, retirement information from TRS and IMRF, and your other post-employment benefits. Following that is required supplementary information. This includes budget versus actual information for that general fund. And it also includes some schedules relating to TRS, IMRF, and your other post-employment benefits. This includes information about your liabilities associated with each of those retirement plans and the OPEB plan. And then there's also some notes to the RSI that indicate what the excess expenditures of your appropriations are. After that are some supplementary information, combining schedules for the non-major funds, some other budget versus actual schedules for those non-major funds. And then, as Mr. Rollins mentioned, the statistical section is the other section that's over and above the basic requirements for financial reporting for the certificate program. There's 10 years worth of trend information for those various categories, including your revenue capacity with your tax levy information, debt capacity, and other financial information. So that's a real quick overview of the CAFR. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions? I have a general question. We have some new people in our finance department, and I don't know if you were involved in our audit last year or not. I guess as a board member, I'd kind of like to know, and maybe this is a Nikki question, or are we making progress on areas that needed to be performed in a better way? I mean, obviously, every audit I've ever seen has recommendations for improvement and opportunities to do things better, or more accurately, or whatever. But are we making progress from last year's audit to this year's audit on those areas that we had opportunities from the previous audit?
I'll be happy to take that question, and I think the definitive answer is yes. If you look at, it's not the number of audit comments that are included in the board communication, it's the severity of the comments that are included. Right. And one of the large comments that was included last year was that the balance sheet items were not being reconciled.
Right.
when I came in February, and Michelle had been here about 3 weeks before that in her current capacity, I believe we were reconciling maybe 10% of the balance sheet accounts. Over the next several months, Michelle and her team rapidly got that up to about 95% at the end of June, with the two big remaining pieces being the cash operating account and the payroll liabilities. And those two were tied together. It was a huge lift for the team and Michelle to take that the rest of the way home, because of the number of facets to actually completing that. I mean, there's student activity funds that are in smaller funds, the agency funds that Chad referred to, that as part of moving the reconciliation process to the schools into the central office, that created additional work. Some of those pieces were not going into the financial records in the way that we would have liked. So that information was discovered. There were a number of things that kind of Chad will speak to, I think, in some of the comments. One of them was we had a prior management philosophy of actually remitting more to IMRF and TRS than we were actually required on a biweekly basis for our payroll, just so that we had a small amount of cushion. Well, that philosophy caused a great deal of pain in actually reconciling the cash, the operating cash account. Michelle and her team were actually able to dig into the reasons behind why we had all these difficulties, and were able to, by the end of the audit, to have discovered all the things that were not going in the way that would be the best practice, have implemented processes and procedures to make those changes, and those are already incorporated into the first quarter of the fiscal 18 financial reporting. So Chad can speak as well, but I think it's been a huge, long effort. I want to thank Michelle Yar and all of the financial services team for the hard work and the huge lift that they have done over the last 8 to 10 months. And I truly believe that the work will be much easier next year at year end. So hopefully that addresses the question that you asked.
It does, perfect. Any other questions or comments? Mr. Rollins.
These aren't questions, these are just actually comments. The part about these books that I like the best are one of the supplemental parts that you say isn't required, which is the statistical part at the end. I mean, if you don't pour through the budget, I urge anybody to just go through, because it gives you a pretty good indication of a lot of the trends in the district and the trends in our community. And it shows you some of the headwinds that we are really facing. If you look, and I just want to call out a few of them. If you look on page 130, that shows our assessed value and actual value of taxable property in the district. So we peaked in 2009 with a total taxable equalized assessed valuation of $2.8 million, $2.848 million, sorry, that's billion, $2.848 billion. And we're now, it just turned the corner from 2015 to 2016, just started going back up, and we're at 1.98 billion. That's a decrease. We're still at a decrease of $900 million in our equalized assessed valuation, which is 32% below its high. So that's one of the things I wanted to point out. Another, I already pointed out on page 133, shows the actual amount that we've levied and the fact that we've actually reduced the levy from 2011 to 2012 and then kept the levy pretty steady since then. There was another piece of this on page 138, which is, again, not good news, but I just want to point it out. This shows the per capita personal income in the Rockford Region Economic Development District from the U.S. Census Bureau. We peaked in 2008. Our per capita income in this area is below, still, where it was in 2008. So I just wanted to point that out as well. And then the last piece that I wanted to just mention on 141, because I actually asked Ms. Thorne and Ms. Jar this question. So on page 141, it shows what it seems to show, I'll say that, the percentage change per pupil in our operating expenditures. And it looks like we increased by 11.81% from 2016 to 2017, and that number did jump out at me, and I did ask that question. So here's the explanation that I was given, which I do want to say in case somebody asks you about it. So that operating expenditure number includes the TRS on behalf payments. And so for those of you who have been around a while and heard me talk about them before, you can close your ears, but for the newer people, TRS on behalf payments is what the state pays to the teacher's pension system. We have no control over that number. We never see that money. It's not even a pass-through. It doesn't even pass through us, but we're required to put it, yeah, it's a flyby, but we're required to put it on our books. So when the state contributes a lot more to the teacher's pension system, that shows up on our books. And that's what I'm told is what happened this year, is that the state, probably because of the income tax increased a significantly larger amount to the teacher's pension system. That shows up as increasing our operating expenditures, and that's why we've got that huge percentage increase per pupil. I really wish there was a way to get these statistics with numbers that don't have the TRS in it, and maybe we can do that at some point as well, because I think that would be a useful number to look at, carving out the TRS on behalf payments.
Good point. Okay, any other discussion or questions? Thank you.
There's another document.
You go right ahead.
Yep. So the other document is the board communications packet. And this includes some required communications that auditing standards require that we have with the board. And it includes a discussion about any changes in accounting policy, which there were none this year. It discusses the significant accounting estimates that were used during the audit process and our evaluation of those estimates, those being the self-insured healthcare liability, IMRF, and OPEB actuary evaluations, and then the allocation of the TRS net pension liability between the district and the state. This packet also includes any corrected audited adjusting journal entries, which there were some auditing journal entries, one of which was a material audit adjustment. And it also includes any uncorrected statements, adjustments that we didn't make because of materiality, which there were none of those this year. The management letter then is the last item that's included in the board communications packet, and this might get to your question about the comments that we have. Included in this packet are the current year comments, and there's also an appendix in the back that we list all of the prior year comments and whether or not they were implemented, partially implemented, or if they were repeated again. And so the management letter, as a part of our audit process, the purpose of a financial statement audit is not to test internal controls or give an opinion on internal controls, but as a part of our process, we are required to gather information and understanding of the controls that are in place to design our audit tests regarding the financial statements. We are required to disclose in writing to the board any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies in internal controls. There were 2 material weaknesses that were identified, both of which Nicole discussed previously. There was a material audit adjustment, which is a repeat finding from the prior year, so we're required to include that material weakness. And then the bank reconciliations, which she mentioned before, the timeliness of those bank reconciliations were also considered a material weakness. After that, there's some items that we noted as deficiencies that are really less material than those material weaknesses and significant deficiencies. There were some repeat comments regarding purchase card transactions, collateralization of district deposits, and capital asset depreciation schedules. There were a couple of new comments relating to activity funds, the policies and procedures being followed, and then also some bank reconciliations associated with the activity funds. Then there were a few other comments, things that are recommendations for improvement, a couple of repeat items, development of a disaster recovery plan for your IT area, some password lockout policy recommendations, and then a few other new comments, a couple which also relate to IT, some interactive account groups, which is general ledger cleanup types of stuff. And then the payroll liability, which Nicole also mentioned already regarding the philosophy related to those prepayments with TRS. Also included in here are some future accounting pronouncements. We always include those things that may impact the district in future years, and we disclose those effective dates. One significant one is GASB 75, and a couple years ago, you were required to implement GASB 68, which dealt with the liability associated with your retirement plans. GASB 75 will essentially do the same thing for your other post-employment benefits. Your liabilities associated with those will now have to be included on the face of your financial statements. And then the last item, as I mentioned, is the appendix, which include all of the prior year comments and the status of those comments. There was one material weakness last year that was repeated. There were 9 other deficiencies, 5 of which were implemented, 4 of which were either repeated partially or completely.
Mr. Connor?
Mr.
Rollins.
Oh, sorry, I didn't.
Okay.
Oh.
Mr. Connor?
Yeah, this will be fairly quick. 2 questions. One is, who's going to follow up on the IT questions? Because there was an IT policy, and the disaster recovery is the one I want to focus on. Who's going to follow up on that?
That's me.
Okay. And when might we have some kind of plan to address these, do you think?
We're working on an action plan now that will be, the initial part of that will be due in about a week and a half, and we hope to have the plan developed with this full test in place by June 30th.
Okay. And will that come to ops so we can at least?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. I think the only comment I had on disaster recovery, I looked at it, and the comment was right. You had 2 things that are fairly distance apart, but usually the concept is triangulation. So I think there was a comment about the cloud, and which has its own reliability issues in some ways. So anyway, I just want to make sure that we see that when that comes back, and the approach on the disaster recovery. I think the only other thing, there was a comment in there about the actual inventory. And the one thing that I will say, please put in there that actually, I was a little surprised on the IT policy on the audit, but that you would address it. But the one thing I will say is, typically with backup and recovery, one of the issues is it's not so easy to physically do a disaster recovery. And so typically there's a plan that every once in a while you actually have to go do it. You know what I mean? Not the full thing, but you test. Like, can I bring back up the education systems or whatever it is, financial systems. So that would be the one thing I'd look for also. Is when would we test it, which I think you said you'd address. So, okay, thanks.
Okay, any other comments or questions? Any other information you want to share with us?
That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you for being here. Okay. We have a motion and a second, and we need to call the roll on the approval of the 2017 audit.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins? Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
The motion passes with 6 yeses, 1 absent.
And on behalf of the whole board, thank you all for the hard work that you all do to make this happen. It's a lot of work, I'm sure. All right. Thank you. Now we will move on to Sun Life Assurance Company Stop Loss Administrator. This was covered in ops, I believe, right? So I'll take a motion and a second to suspend the rules to consider this item.
So moved.
Second.
All right. Any discussion? I'll have the coordinator call the roll on the suspension of the rules for covering 16B.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
The motion passes with 6 yeses, 1 absent.
Yeah, Mr. Zediker, are you going to do a presentation on this?
You need a motion and a
That would be good.
So moved.
Motion? Second, Mr. Dixon. Okay. Now, we can have Mr. Zediker.
Yep, I will introduce Inez Harris, our benefits manager, to present the stop loss renewal.
If you could hit the microphone button there, Inez. There you go.
All right. Good evening, everyone. I'm here today to present to you the health insurance stop loss renewal. Basically, a little background, the district's health plan is self-funded. And being self-funded, we pay all of our own expenses. And so in order to protect ourselves against catastrophic loss, we look to purchase stop-loss insurance. Currently, we have a stop-loss in place of $325,000 under Voya Reliant Lifestar. Here is a little history. If you look at 2015, at that time, we went to the $325,000 specific deductible, increasing it from 2014 at the $295,000. In 2017, year-to-date, we currently have 3 claims that have exceeded the $325,000. And of those 3 claims, going into 2018, we do have one individual that has been lasered, meaning basically with our current $325,000 specific deductible, that individual would have to meet the $1 million specific deductible. Gallagher, Williams, and Manny helped us by approaching several major carriers, and based on the potential ongoing large claims that we have, most of the carriers were uncompetitive and declined to provide a proposal. We did have 2, and that was from Voya, our current provider, and then Sun Life. And looking at those 2 proposals and maintaining our $325,000 specific deductible, you see here that Voya currently has an annual premium of about $1,145,000. And looking at the 2 proposals, they both were an increase. So if we went with Voya or stayed with Voya, it would be an increase of about $447,000. If we changed to Sun Life, it would be an increase of about $297,000. I'm here for administration recommendation that we, number 1, we increase the stop loss specific deductible from the $325,000 to the $350,000. We're also seeking approval to change to Sun Life from Voya as our stop loss provider. Keeping Voya would mean it would cost us $1,392,000, while switching to Sun Life, it would be $1,316,000. In summary, moving from the $325,000 to the $350,000 specific deductible, the cost increase with Voya would be $198,330. The cost increase to Sun Life would be $125,730. So moving from Voya to Sun Life, we would that would equate to a $77,000 difference in premium if we did switch.
Okay, questions? Mr. Rollins.
I assume somebody asked this, but so based on the claims experience last year, how much more would we have to pay by moving the specific deductible from $325,000 up to $350,000?
How much more would we have to pay?
Yeah.
Well, my understanding is that's already in the premium for the switch there. The premiums do include the change to the $350,000.
But if we move from $325,000 to $350,000, then we are self-insuring an additional $25,000.
Correct.
So that's our specific stop loss on each individual. So some set of individuals will pay another $25,000 each, which you then have to offset against the premium savings. So based on our claims experience, like how much more would we have had to pay last year if we had had a $350,000 specific deductible last year?
Do we know the answer to that? Probably don't know.
There were 3 of them?
There's 3 of them. So
Okay.
So, just to address that, Michael Parsons with Gallagher, Williams, Manning, we did the marketing. So last year, you had 7 claims that exceeded that $325,000. So with that 7, it would have been an additional $75,000. Well, you're looking at an additional 7 times 25, $175,000 in potential increased risk last year. This year, we're at 3, The year before last, we were at 4, I believe, and the year before, we're at 5 and then at 4. So that 7 seems to be an anomaly. Anytime you're self-funded, there is potential for additional risk, but you're really looking at $175,000 of additional risk to answer your question, Mr. Rollins. If you look at the average over that period of time, it is 4.75 is the average number of claims over the $325,000, with the $125,000 difference in premium between the $325 and the $350. We would need 5 spec hits to be in a situation. You'd have to have more than 5 specific hits to then be in a position where you potentially take on a larger claim increase. And so with the 4.75, there is the opportunity to save dollars. Last year does appear to be an anomaly, and we know that one of our large claimants for next year will in fact have $1 million specific deductible on them. And so what we're looking at is even if with the average, we would really only be paying 4. So the opportunity to save anywhere from, on average, we're looking at probably $25,000 to $50,000. And should we have a good year, there's the opportunity to put another $125,000 in the district's pocket. So the opportunities are there to save dollars. The risk, again, anytime we have this situation, there's going to be some risk. The risk does seem to be somewhat limited based on the history of the organization and the claims that we have.
Okay, so those numbers, those are on a calendar year?
Yes. Yeah. Our stop loss runs calendar, which is contrary to everything else we do, which is fiscal. But the numbers have never been right to try and switch from a fiscal year to from a calendar year to a fiscal year with stop loss.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Siegel?
I think one of the questions I've been trying to figure out since the ops meeting was how much savings do we have by lowering, not really lowering our premium because they're going up, but by having the lower premium on the higher deductible. I mean, do we have a way of measuring how much less we're going to pay over the next 10 years because we've gone with the higher deductible? And then do we have a way of comparing that to what would our payout be if we ended up keeping the deductible lower?
So stop loss tends to be a year-to-year thing simply because it's a pooled product, and so it's very difficult for me to sit here and tell you that over the next 10 years, here's what we're going to look at. Generally, what we look at is year-to-year, what comes in and where is our value.
Right.
And if I thought we had a situation where somebody was really coming in and undercutting everybody else and let's jump on this because it's lower this year, but then next year we're going to get killed, we would be aware of that. But really, to answer your question, from a stop-loss pooled product, it's really difficult to project moving forward what we would see. And so we watch as the premiums start to go up, we begin to get to a point where there's premium savings based on risk, historical risk, which is why we track that, versus premiums. And as we take a look at this, we finally hit that point where it looks like there's an opportunity to save dollars by moving up to that $350. You'd actually ask the question in Operations Committee, well, what if we went higher than that? Would there be a potentially increased savings? My concern always in increasing your specific deductible is once you go up to another higher specific deductible, it is very difficult, almost impossible, then to lower that specific deductible in future years, even with other companies. I've almost never seen that happen. So once the district moves to that $350, there really is no going back unless something were really to happen where we lose huge populations or something like that. Does that answer your question?
Okay, Mr. Connor?
Yep, just to say it, we did talk about this as at ops, the fact of the deductible and not being able to really go backwards. So, and the risk leveraging is really what we're doing. So,
I had a question on the length of the term of this agreement. Is this a one-year agreement?
It is.
With multiple options later, or just we rebid it after a year?
Yeah, it's just a 1 year,
Okay.
beginning 1/1/18.
So if we decided that we were spending more than we thought we were going to spend because of occurrences that we saw or whatever, the next year we may want to think about, well, maybe we should go back to a lower.
Again, according to Gallagher, we want to be careful about that because, again, if we do increase it now to the 350,
Right.
it would be difficult to
go
get
back. Okay.
something comparable at the 325 again.
I see, okay. Okay, any other questions or discussion? Thank you. I think we'll call the roll now on the motion that's on the floor for the approval of the Sun Life Assurance Company stop-loss administrator.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
The motion passes with 6 yeses, 1 absent.
Okay, our next item, Ms. Hoadley is going to present on the resolution authorizing Executive Director of Special Education to resolve special education complaints, I think, at resolution or mediation sessions. If you can get your mic to work. There we go.
There. This resolution is something that the board, has passed way in the past. It was, I believe in 2009 or 8, around there, it was the last time you actually passed this resolution. So we thought it was timely to bring it back since you have a new executive director of special ed, Jen Lawrence. It provides the necessary authorization for the special ed administrator to go into mediation sessions and resolve matters in accordance with the Individuals with Education Act, as well as Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, as well as the school code comparable provisions there. So that's why you're being asked to pass the resolution.
Any questions for Larry? All right, if not, this will be presented at our January 9th board meeting for a vote. And Dr. Jarrett, you have our last item on the agenda, naming and renaming of facilities.
Well, we've already had a great deal of conversation about this topic. This would be a first reading. As the superintendent, board policy asks me to make a recommendation. I am recommending that for new school number 1, which serves the region, which is Cherry Valley, White Swan, and also Thompson, thank you. Those 3 schools, we are making the recommendation that that school be named Cherry Valley. And the second recommendation I'm making is that we've had some really wonderful communication from the community. We had some at tonight's board meeting. We had some at the operations committee meeting. We had some at the naming committee meetings. A lot of exciting conversation about what we can name new school number 2. We are under no real immediate urgency to give that, to put a name in place. I would like to provide some additional time for conversation, but it looks like there's some really outstanding community support for the name Constance B. Lane. And at this point, my recommendation is that the board delay that decision so we have some additional time for community conversation. But we're certainly listening, and we're appreciative of the really, really high level of community engagement we've had around this name. It sounds, it's exciting that we're talking about some really, really high-quality individuals that we're recognizing, and I think the process is playing out well.
Any board member comments or discussion? Mr. Siegel, did you?
How long of a delay would you anticipate at this point?
The maximum delay would be about a year for this year, but we could move more quickly depending on just allowing additional time for consensus to emerge. But I think at the absolute latest, we'd want to have something in place around this time because the new school number 2.
Okay.
Well, we're doing it. Oh, Mr. Schmidt thinks we might be able to get in early, so 6 months it is.
Okay.
So I guess that would give us the ability to potentially do a holiday move. So we won't take that full year. I was thinking in terms of a full academic year.
Right, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Schmidt.
Any other questions or comments or discussion on that? If not, this will come for a vote on our board meeting on January 9th. If there are no other agenda items or comments by the board, I'll take a motion and a second to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. Mr. Connor, second by Mr. Siegel. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, same sign. We are adjourned at 8:39.